Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Pastured Poultry Production and Profitability with Terrell, Spencer. My name is Jeff Jasinski and I'm an agricultural economist with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, more commonly known as NCAT. NCAT is a nationwide nonprofit organization with 6 regional headquarters across the country. We work on issues pertaining to sustainable agriculture, sustainable energy, and sustainable communities. Today's webinar is being funded in part by the USDA Risk Management Agency, or RMA. We are grateful to RMA for its funding and support of this webinar and projects. One of the sustainable agricultural programs that NCAT manages, the National Sustainable Agricultural Information Service, which is better known as ATRA, provides publications, technical assistance through our telephone hotline and website, webinars and other information to farmers, ranchers, and educators, extension agents, and others involved in sustainable agriculture across the country. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on NCAT's ATRA webpage, www.ncat.atra.org. ATRA is funded through a cooperative agreement with the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service, and we're grateful for their support as well. Our presenter today is Terrell, or Spencer, and we'll cover the basics of pastured poultry production as well as common advantages and pitfalls of getting started in the business and keys to keeping operations profitable. The webinar is also a kickoff for a Montana-based series of 4 workshop trainings on pastured poultry production here in Montana. The basic dates and locations will be given on a slide at the end of this webinar. As you are listening to today's webinar, you can type in any questions you might have in the field you see on your screen, and I'll gather them up, sort them out, and have Spence answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. So feel free to keep asking those questions as we're going along, and we will document them all. Please don't be shy about asking questions. We won't be able to get to all of them during the webinar, but we will get back to you via email in the days to come. Also, before we begin, I just want to remind our viewers to take a few minutes to complete the survey you will see that will come onto your screen right after we close the webinar. So please do that if you can. In fact, we always welcome your questions to ATRA. You're welcome to call our toll-free technical assistant line at 1-800-346-9140. We also invite you to go to our website, www.atra.ncat.org, and click on Ask an Ag Expert button to send us a question by email. Don't worry if you didn't get that phone number or website. They will be on your screen at the end of the webinar. We respond to all the questions we receive, and this service is offered free of charge. Our presenter today is Terrell Spencer, and is our pastured poultry specialist with NCAT in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Spence owns and operates a pastured poultry farm across the Creek Farm in West Fork, Arkansas. The farm raises thousands of pastured poultry each year, producing several hundred birds per week during the growing season from March to December. Spence's work with veterans, especially across the South, and runs an intern program for veterans on his farm. I think it's time to get started, so let me turn things over to Spence.
Howdy y'all, my name is Spence and I'll be doing the webinar today. We're going to start off here briefly. Everyone knows we're in the pastured poultry webinar, so we're going to move from the title screen and we're just going to do a quick outline of what we're going to hit today. First is just a short introduction where I kind of talk in history, where I kind of talk about my family and what we do to get an idea of where I'm coming from. On our farm. Then we'll talk about just some of the benefits of raising your birds on pasture. The webinar is really going to focus on chicken production. That's the most common type of pastured poultry, and so we'll hit broiler production, just the production basics, and then we'll also go through some of the financial breakdown. We'll give you an idea of what we do, money we make, and that kind of stuff per bird. We'll also hit layers, as in lay-in chickens, the ones that make eggs, and we'll do the same. We'll do some layer production. We'll also do just a financial breakdown, and then we'll finish up real quickly by hitting other poultry types. We'll talk about turkeys.
It has something to do with the quality of his voice, not the.
And that, and so we'll also do the pitfalls and challenges just generally over pastured poultry. And then we'll also look at multi-species grazing briefly, just trends for success if you're going to make it in this business. And then also we'll quickly cover the workshops Jeff alluded to at the beginning of the webinar. And then we'll also take questions, which will, to me, is always the fun part. So, all right. So getting started, why a farm? The short story is that I actually got involved farming just because of some of the issues I was having when I came back from the war. I'm a vet I fought in Iraq, '04 to '05 in the Army as a machine gunner, and just found a lot of consolation in it. Beat my spear into a pruning hook, so to speak, my sword into a plowshare. And I eventually, it became what I wanted to do. We started off it started off an outlet for me to vent a lot of the frustrations that I had. Instead of punching holes in walls or flipping out on my family, I just started taking out hickory and oak trees, cleared pastures, and as I did that, I found that I really liked doing that kind of stuff. And as I kind of moved past recovering from the war, it just became what I wanted to do. And I really liked farming, and we tried a bunch of different things and settled in on the pastured poultry. And everything we do is based on values in our life. We may state it like that, but there's non-negotiables. There's beliefs that we have, and everything's centered around that. All of our actions and that's true for the farm. So across the creek farm, our pastured poultry farm, one of the key things that I have for it, one of the clear goals for me, is that it be a point of resource and not of burden. So for my family, that can be financial, time, there's just a lot of ways that I want this thing to enrich our lives and not detract from it. And same with the community, running the veteran internship program that they talked about. For the land, we live on some really erodible, steep, hilly land. So you don't have to have great land to start farming, to at least get your start. And, we can't make a lot of mistakes or else we lose soil and we're trying to farm on bedrock. And then for the critters, whether it be our livestock that we raise, or even for the native population of predators and everything else out there, the wildlife and the flora and the fauna, we want our farm to do no harm to them as well. And most importantly, I think, is for our bank account. We really don't want to go into debt. And then one of the first rules of sustainability is, you have to be able to do it long term. And so we really do strive to make a profit in everything we do. And for the most part, we've been successful. And for me too, I just like to work. You can't be lazy or to do any type of farming. It attracts folks that like to work, and there's a lot of characteristics that I liked about the Army that I like about farming. So real briefly, I alluded to that. I did my little tour in the Middle East. We got back, we started doing a lot of, we started off with kind of a very small garden, which very rapidly became something big. Not so big that you could see it from space, but pretty close in our rental properties, or where we were renting. I had a son born. I really started to have some issues, like a lot of other guys, and that were in my situation. And so then we ended up buying some land, and it was a steep holler. For all you non-southern folks, a holler is a draw or narrow valley. So we bought a holler in northwest Arkansas that had lots of woods, little flat ground, and little clear ground. And like I alluded to, did a lot of clearing, and it kind of was a vessel to work through some of my issues. In 2010, we really started looking at the farm as a business. And even though we only had 300 broilers that we produced that year, and we had a flock of 50 or so hens, and that's where the genesis started off. And as you get started, it's good to start small and work your way up. We got all the experience we needed, and then some with those small numbers. In 2011, a grocery store approached us about potentially supplying them with meat. And so we did the last half of the year, we did 2 batches of 200 broilers. and and we took meticulous records, like how much feed and how much did it cost, and really saw the need for record keeping, so we could decide whether or not we were going to do it, or whether or not, more importantly, we could do it. And as we took those records, we built a business plan. For 2012, we saw things like, man, we cannot do it on our land that we have now. So we actually went out and we found more land. 2011, we also got goats, to start trialing with, to figure out if we could make money on those. So as 2012, this past year, rolled around, we scaled up significantly. We went from 800 to over 3,000 broilers. We found 20 acres of additional lease land that had to be developed. In truth, we're still kind of fencing that off, but we got watering systems, everything out there. We converted to GMO-free feed. That was something we decided to do in our business plan. We actually get it from a company out of Ohio called Highland Naturals. They give discounts to vets, which was really attractive to me. But the biggest reason was there was another pastured poultry farmer that I followed in his footsteps. He was using it, and the changes from the conventional feed, the quality was so much higher that we actually, even though it was more expensive, we saved money. And it really has been something neat on our farm, and it helps diversify us too on the egg market. So we're different than the folks that just do conventional eggs. And we also we put up a high tunnel, and we use that to overwinter our flocks, and we're trying that out. But we did some vegetable production, hothouse vegetable production, and we'll do a lot more this year. So stepping into 2013, we're looking at doing 8 to 10,000 broilers, which is a little scary, but we've tripled several times in the past, and we're very systematic now, and we feel like we'll do it. We're looking at building a state-inspected grading facility so we can expand our flocks in Arkansas. I can't have over 200 eggs in our state, or 200 layers in our state, unless I grade the eggs, and that. And we're also slowly expanding the meat goat herd to diversify. We'd like to start a commercial meat goat herd, and we're expanding the vegetable operation, and we're also looking at adding hogs. So, from 300 broilers to 50 hens, it's been a quick scale up, but I will say that sometimes it has felt like riding a rocket. But with the business plan, with the really focusing on the finances, it has felt controlled. So I say all this just to let you all know I don't come from a farming family. We didn't have land, and it is possible, if you're out there and you're not from a farming family, to get started and to build it into a business. So for a pastured poultry webinar, a great place to start off would be to ask, why do we raise chickens on pasture? And so we're going to very briefly touch on these things. Each of these could be a whole webinar in and of themselves, but these are general characteristics. And the first one is the forages. We raise chickens on pasture so they can eat forages, whether it be like plants, different grasses, legumes like clover, that kind of thing, or whether it be insects. And incidentally, a lot of times when they eat the insects, they also get the plants the insects have eaten. Like grasshoppers eat, grass, and then the chicken eats a grasshopper and the grass. And so one of the big things for this is feed savings. Going through the research, it's pretty safe to say you're going to get a 5 to 20% reduction on your feed consumption. Now, but let's qualify that. That depends on a whole lot of factors. If you're in a lot of the country this year, drought would be a huge factor. It depends on rainfall. It depends on the species of plants that you have in your pasture. It depends on your management of your birds and the health of your birds, and just how your system's designed. So I say count on 5% or less when you do your planning. In fact, it'd be wise to not even count when you factor in raising them on pastures. Don't even count the savings. And so that way, if there is savings, it goes back into your pocketbook. I feel like we can range anywhere from 10% reduction during spring to 15% reduction in spring to during real bad times less than 5. So and that seems pretty trivial, like 5 or 10%. Well, that's not a lot, but actually it is. Poultry is a game of margins. You your net margin, what you actually take minus your expenses, what you bring home, isn't very much. And when you look at feed bills, when you start having writing checks for $10,000 for this month's feed shipment for your farm, knocking off 10% of that is $1,000. That's $1,000 I didn't spend that I don't get taxed on, that stays in my bank account. So the savings can actually be pretty huge. Another big reason for raising poultry on pasture is the manure. 100 broilers roughly produce about 100 ton, or excuse me, a ton of wet manure, and they apply it on the field themselves. And typically, when farmers buy chicken litter, which in our area in Arkansas used to try to give it away, but now it's in such high demand that it's really difficult to find, given the price of things like ammonia nitrogen, ammonia nitrate, and all the other nitrogen fertilizers. It's difficult to find, and even that stuff, it's cut with wood shavings. It could be a 2 or 3 to 1 or higher amount of wood shavings onto that litter, mixed in with that manure. So this is straight manure, and since it's deposited straight out of the birds, it's not in high enough concentration to kill your forages. But nothing greens up the pasture faster than chicken manure. And one thing that we've seen is it really, really is helpful for degraded pastures. So pastures that aren't super high in fertility, they respond like gangbusters once you get a little bit of rain. And for our broiler pens, we actually see racing stripes of green that happen in our pasture following the broilers. And then we also see all kinds of forages popping up that we never put there. And we'll talk about that later. Another huge reason why we raise poultry on pasture is because of the characteristics that everything they scrounge up impacts on the meat and eggs. Like a lot of the things that the poultry get from the grasses, from the insects, are actually fat soluble vitamins. And so like vitamin A, vitamin E, all the omega-3s, which are a type of fatty acid, in that they actually get deposited in the fat. And so we really see the most bang for our bucks when it comes to things like eggs. And a lot of folks are familiar, the yolks from a pastured hen, especially in spring or fall in our area, where the rains really kick in in most years, and we get a real good forage base. The yolks can turn almost red, and that's because of all the additional stuff that's put into them. And even the conventional poultry industry, raising stuff in chicken houses, they do all kinds of additives to try to get that same color into the egg, because they know that's what the consumer wants and identifies as a healthier egg. And there's been studies that have shown this, multiple studies in that. And you also get other benefits like lower cholesterol. There is a difference in taste that's been documented. Certainly a difference in texture with the birds as well. So, and all this will be discussed in length. We've got a new ATRA publication, which you'll be able to get, Forages for Pastured Poultry. And it'll be out in a month or so. It's in editing now, but I'll really go deep in the weeds over these kind of things and give a lot of the citations for the scientific research that's come out mostly in the past decade for the benefits of forages on poultry production. Another huge advantage is sanitation. Okay, so in a confinement operation, sanitation's a real big issue. You've got all these birds in the house. The houses are expensive, so you have to maximize the amount of birds you have in there, and that to maximize your return on that infrastructure. But that creates problems. 100 birds if it makes a ton of wet manure, well, what's 20,000 birds going to do? How much manure is that? And you can't stir the birds up. So A lot of times what happens, you say, well, I'm able to go down to brand X box store and buy a chicken from so and so, and it's antibiotic free. Well, it's antibiotic free, but more than likely it's not drug free. If you've ever been to a feed store, you can buy the medicated or non-medicated feed. There's a drug called amprolium, which helps prevent coccidiosis, which is a sanitation disease, and that drug is widely used in the poultry industry to keep the birds from getting sick, and either dying or not performing well because of the stress of the density, the stocking density in houses, but also the sanitation and that. So essentially on pasture, when we move the birds, we give them clean flooring, which from a poultry's point of view is often delicious with all the forages, and that. And so sanitation should not be a problem on pasture. And as a norm, general norm, most producers don't have to use antibiotics or any type of or amprolium. We talked about some of the benefits before, but the marketability, it's fairly easy to sell the birds. Like it's something people want, the customer wants. You know, you never see conventionally produced chicken have a picture of the inside of a chicken house. And there's a reason for that. If anything, on the label, they'll have a picture of, a chicken frolicking through a pasture with grass and butterflies and rainbows and the sun's out and it's a wonderful day, which is well, it is deceptive. So, but that's what the consumer wants. That's what the consumer sees as wholesome. And it's easier to sell that bird if you can make the consumer feel like that's where their birds were produced. Well, in pastured poultry, we don't have to fake the funk, so to speak. Our birds are out there. These are pictures from just about all these pictures are from my farm, just different batches of birds that we've done. These are Freedom Rangers on this slide, out running. This was 2 years ago in our fields in May. You get a higher return per bird, or you should, and you definitely get a higher gross. So, you're going to sell a chicken for, 10, 15, $20, depending on your market, depending on a lot of factors. Whereas in a conventional poultry producer may only get 15 or 12 cents for their bird. So it definitely makes a difference. Now, there's all kinds of discussions that need to be had about, you pay for feed costs, the conventional guys don't. There's all kinds the devil's in the details, but you should make net much more per bird than a conventional housing system, which is why you don't have to do 20,000 birds per batch in order to make it. And the big thing about pasture is poultry is that it's easy in, easy out. It requires minimum investment. Versus a chicken house may cost $200,000 to $300,000 now. You don't have to pay near as much to get a poultry operation up. For under $1,000, you can raise a batch of birds up and have them butchered. And this is kind of a good example of that. These are some early pen designs we experimented with in our hauler, if you will. And, there's $100 tied up in that pen. And then on top of that, we also have, you can see the birds in there and that. But that's a very doable thing for you in your situation. Even if you never had any experience with poultry, you could be doing this year. And versus writing a contract with the company and getting involved in the integrator system. So it's inexpensive. It's easily marketable. I mean, this looks clean. It looks pleasant. People get a warm and fuzzy feeling in their heart when they see this. And it's also just demonstrates the clean and sanitary aspect of pastured poultry. Now, how do we get those forages into the birds? Well, there's several factors that affect the consumption of forages by poultry. One is just bird type and species, and that ranges the gamut. You've got broilers, which are harvested so young that they, unless you are deliberate, they're not going to be good forage consumers. All the way to geese, which eat nothing but grass and live off grass. And so, like the bird type, the breed, the bird species, all those things play into ultimately how much more or how much forages a bird's going to consume. And it varies even individuals in the flock. You got some birds that, just like people, that love their veggies, and some that, they just want to eat out of the feeder just because of individual whims. The time of day is actually really critical when the birds have access to forages. They're really going to hit the pastures hard in the hours before sunset. In that pre-sunset where it's still a little dark, or it's starting to get dark, the sun's going down. We see our layers just go to town right before they go to the roost, and the same with the broilers. And this has been documented by behavioral scientists. This is when chickens really like to forage. There's another peak time where right when they come off the roost in the morning, and having access to forages then, having access to feed and water is very important. But that's really, those two times, sunset and right around sunrise, are really when those birds are going to really hit the foraging hard. Experience the individual bird, how old it is. Broilers are often taken from 7 to 9 weeks, especially the Cornish cross. And so they don't have a lot of time to learn what to eat. I've got 2 little boys, which we saw in the first slide. And, the first time you put refried beans or enchiladas, we eat a lot of Mexican at our place, in front of them, they don't like it, and then the second time and it's a chore to make them eat it. But, the 5th or 6th time, they're asking for it for dinner. And it's the same thing with the birds. The more experience they get, they'll figure out what's good, what's not, and they'll really get in the habit of eating it. So for the broilers that aren't around a long time, we really take specific steps, like trying to get them out as early as possible, which for us is 3 weeks. So that way they have the rest of the 2/3 of their remaining life to go ahead and figure out like what's good and learn to love forages. Palatability is obviously a huge thing. Palatability is a $5 word for how tasty something is to something. And so the tastiness of what the chickens are eating. The plant type or species is real big when they're eating plants. Legumes, and those are things like alfalfa, clover, vetch. Birds really like them, not only because they probably taste good. You can eat clover yourself. Probably not going to do a lot of it, but it's not disagreeable. But it has a decent taste, and then it's also really high in nitrogen or protein, which the birds can taste. They know it's good for them. They crave that protein. And then also grasses. Grasses, the birds like some grasses, and some grasses they'll never touch. And a kind of a neat way of getting those grasses that they never touch into the birds, like this year with the drought, we had stuff like barnyard grass in our area, which nothing likes, which is why it grows in the barnyard. But grasshoppers ate it in the drought. The chickens ate the grasshoppers, and so they were still getting a lot of forages through the abundant grasshoppers in the drought condition. So anyways, that was kind of a neat thing that happened with us that we noticed this year. So plant type and species are very important. Insects, same thing. Some insects are real, or other invertebrates don't taste good, and some things to a chicken it's like eating candy, and in that. So and as a general rule, anytime they eat insects, it's about worth 4 times the same amount of volume of feed, of protein, poultry ration. So there may not be a lot of insects compared to the feed consumption, but what they do eat, really, you get a lot of bang for your buck as far as poultry nutrition. And finally, just a different stage of growth. No one, like zucchini. When we eat zucchini out of the garden, you don't want to eat a zucchini that's 4 foot long because it's pithy. It doesn't taste good. The texture is all wrong. Same with tomatoes. You don't want to overripe tomato. And this applies as well to forages. The stage of growth, the height, a chicken is not going to be that tall. If you're grazing it in Johnson grass or switchgrass that's 5 foot tall, well, they're not going to eat anything. You want the stage of growth, the height is important, but also the stage of growth. When things start making seeds, forage-wise, especially the grasses, they become really woody. They don't taste as good, and they're putting all the the goodies in the plant into the seeds, and so the poultry don't eat them because they don't taste good and they don't get a lot of nutrients out of them. And so the question is pasture poultry right for you? That's ultimately probably why most people are listening to this, is you've kind of got it into your mind somehow that you'd like to do this form of farming. And it's not right for everybody. You could have too short of a growing period, and that could be because it's too cold. Maybe you're in Nome, Alaska, or northern Montana in a valley where it never thaws. It could be too cold, or conversely, it could be too hot. It could be too dry. Your land could be too swampy. Basically, if you don't have pasture already, you're not able to utilize one of the benefits of pasture, is that a lot of times it's out there unutilized. So if you have to create pasture, it may not work for you. In fact, it probably won't. And you have to be real careful. I'm not saying it will not, but you got to put the pen to the paper and do some estimation. Another thing that could trip you up are just state laws, and processing especially. Your state laws, your individual state laws may make it too difficult. And there's a federal poultry processing exemption where you can process up to 20,000 poultry on farm. You can build your own essentially processing plant. It doesn't have to be too technical. A lot of folks are familiar with Joel Salatin. That's what he processes under. The issue, though, is about half of the states, the laws make it too difficult to do that or outright prohibit you. And the same is true with egg production. Some states require you to build an inspected egg grading facility before you sell a single egg. Other states, like Arkansas, I can have up to 200 hens before I have to build and start a facility to start grading and weighing and candling all my eggs. So your individual state laws will play a large part in what you can and can't do. And there's 50 states. We don't have enough time to go into every state. I'm familiar with quite a few of the laws, but that would be excellent ATRA casework material, and we could go into that on an individual basis if you'd like. Another thing I'd point out is on the ATRA website, we actually have a database of processors that process poultry. And so if you go there, if you see a processor that isn't on there, please let me know so I can update it. But that's a great way to see where your closest processor is. And unfortunately, there's really not a lot of processors across the United States. We're actually fortunate to have one within 2 hours drive. The other thing is you might not have any land, or you have too little land for growth. But even with an acre, I still feel like you have enough land to figure out if this is something you want to pursue. You can lease land. ATRA's got all kinds of materials on that. We've got some good publications about identifying land. How do you go about getting lease land? But I would say it doesn't take nearly as much land as what you think it would to raise 100 broilers. So here's some examples real quick of forages that are great for poultry. And there are things like the grasses. We got bluegrass, crabgrass, gamagrass, red top, timothy, wheat, barley, any of the grains that we harvest for food when they're small are great forages. But something just to consider is I'm down in the Ozarks in Arkansas. I'm not out west. I'm not in the Northeast. I'm not in southern Florida. So you probably have forages that look a lot different from this, and that's fine. There's probably something out there if you have pastures that the birds will love, usually at any time of the year, just about. And so then you also have legumes. Common legumes are just about everywhere, things like alfalfa and clover, and also vetch. Lespedeza, it's called poor man's alfalfa here in the South. It grows on really horrible soils, super acidic, clay soils that nothing else will grow on. But chickens like it, and we use it in some of our paddocks because that's all that'll grow, to be honest. And then also things that we would call weeds. The technical name for them is forbs, and it's only a weed if you don't like it, though. So chicory, chickweed, dandelion, some of the docks, kale, that's a vegetable, but historically it's been used in poultry production quite a bit. Purslane, You get the idea. There's a lot of things. This is just a small fraction of things the chickens will eat. And sometimes they'll eat a lot of stuff like cheatgrass. We've got some cheatgrass. The birds will demolish it for a couple weeks, and then it gets too old and they leave it alone. So if it's not on here, it probably works or could work. This by no means is a comprehensive list. So a big question is, do I plant or do I not? And when you go to planting forages, you really got to ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? And the reason is seed is expensive, and getting establishment of forages can be expensive, whether it be in equipment, or drills or whatever else. It costs money to establish forages. And the question that you need to say is, does it offset the feed savings that I could potentially get, or the impact on the feed quality in that? And a lot of times things aren't in your pastures because for other reasons than there's no seed present. Seed banks are built up over centuries, and seed banks are the types and the number of seeds in a given area of soil. And so a lot of times those seeds aren't there. They've been carried in decades ago by wind. They've been carried in by birds doing their business, what they do out in fields. And the conditions just aren't right. And so something that we've noticed is we run our broilers and our layers, and they scratch through stuff and they deposit manure, and it rains, and the calcium in their manure limes the soil and the fertility goes up, is we start seeing things like clovers, native clovers that we've never sowed, that didn't know were out there. We see white clover coming in. We see all kinds of better grasses, crabgrass in areas. And so what ends up happening is it kind of becomes a synergistic system, the birds on the pasture when it's done right. And so your chickens eat the forages, and it makes the chicken better, and then the chickens actually make your forage base better the next year or the next season. And so that's something you got to look at. Why don't I have these great forages in my pasture to start off with? Another question is, could the labor be used somewhere else? For us, the more money I spend on my broilers operation, the more money we make. The broilers are kind of one of our core are our core operation on our farm. And so if I'm spending time doing other things, that's time I'm not spending on the broilers. And is that the wise business decision? All that being said, I'm not trying to talk you out of anything. Sometimes it is the right choice. We have spread some ryegrass to try to get ryegrass to seed and get established in our pastures. We did a little bit of white clover when we first got out there, just in case the seeds weren't there. So sometimes it is the right choice. That's just a question we want you to ask yourself before you jump whole hog, or maybe whole chicken, into it. And a lot of times it's best to work with what you have. As you change the soil environment, like we said, new stuff will happen, that new species magic. But also usually birds will find something to eat out on pasture. So now we're going to kind of hit just our operation and talk about the broilers. And broilers are our core enterprise. They're the core for our farm, around which all the other enterprises pivot. And so the biggest thing about the broilers, why they're great for a farm, is they're really quick return on investment. Whereas like you buy a cow, I'm not a cow person. We've got specialists that are at NCAT, so call the Atron line if you have cow questions. But you get a cow, you breed her, maybe 2 years, they're 2 years old or older. I'm not a cow guy. Before you get any return on your investment, it's going to have a calf. Hopefully that calf doesn't die, or hopefully you did everything right. You get a calf, you got to grow that calf up, and then you sell the calf. You're looking at 2 or 3 years, as best as I know. Now compare that to a broiler, which it's 8 or 9 weeks, or 7 to 9 weeks. You get them out on pasture at 3 weeks, so they learn how to eat all the forages, and at 9 weeks, they've had 9 weeks of a wonderful life, and then they have one bad day for them. And then the next day you're at the market selling chickens, and you sell it, you got cash in your hand. So you're looking at just over maybe 2 months, versus years, to get a return on your investment for livestock. That's very attractive if cash flow is tight. If you don't have a lot of money in that, and you can actually raise a batch, get a return on it, and then turn around and raise another batch and grow your business, bootstrap it up that way. We use a Cornish cross, which are these white birds here. They're the birds you'll find in chicken houses. A lot of folks don't like them. We don't have a problem with them. Our growing style, we feel like they eat a lot. I've got a short video we're going to try to play here in a second of our birds actually foraging. We really like them. They act like chickens, and they've done well for us. We actually went to them because of for cut-ups. We do a diverse marketing. We have a lot of wholesale customers, like grocery stores and that, and then also we sell direct. But we really do a lot of cut-ups. So we sell boneless, skinless breast and thighs and drumsticks, all that. And the Cornish cross rules when it comes to boneless, skinless breast. It has that nice big plump breast that people want, and it's also what the consumer's used to seeing, which can be an issue if you try to do some of the older breeds. In that it can be really off-putting if the customer isn't educated on the subject. And so we get a feed conversion ratio, that's the FCR, of around 2 to 3 to 1. So that means we put 2 to 3 pounds of feed into the bird, we get 1 pound of live bird. Now when we process or slaughter that bird, now the feathers, the guts, there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't end up, the customer's not going to buy. You lose about 30% of that. So we end up getting about 3.5 pounds of feed to 4 pounds of feed is what it takes us on our farm to produce 1 pound of chicken that gets sold, which isn't bad when you think about it. Okay, and so we also, one of the things we do for the broilers that I'm going to hit a couple times is we run automatic waters on everything. And it is a huge labor saver. You cannot carry enough water once you start moving past a couple hundred birds. It will wear you out. You'll miss stuff in the summer. You'll have birds die, or they'll all pile on top of each other and cut each other up. It's a huge labor saver. And we can run through that with you as an ATRA case. And one of the advantages that we have is it allows us automatic waters. It allows us to grow in 100-degree plus temps that would normally cause the birds to streak out or stroke out. The birds, they cool their bodies through panting, so and they fill up their lungs with cooler air, and it takes the body heat away. Well, when it's 100 degrees, there ain't no cooling their body through getting that cool air in the lungs, because there is no cool air. So one of the things we're able to do is purge the lines with the hot water, and then we unhook it, purge the line, and then we just hose the birds down. And you throw in a beach ball, and it's just about a party in there, because the birds will actually move towards the cold water. It chills them down, and we've had it be 108, 110 degrees, and big birds that are most prone to dying with heat, and they get up and they go to the feeder, and we can hose the top of the pens down so you get evapotranspiration. It acts kind of like a cooler in there. Hose the floor down, and the birds can make it to the evening hours. So that's another reason, if you live in a area prone to real hot temperatures, why automatic waters are critical. And then also our birds are processed at a USDA facility. So we raise our birds in this pen design that you see here. This is a Hopkins pen. It's called a Hopkins pen because it's from Cody Hopkins at Falling Sky Farm in Northwest Arkansas. We'll be having a workshop, a 2 or 3 day workshop on his farm. He does a lot of pasture pork production, all that kind of stuff. And he's a very innovative farmer. He's a young farmer. They started off 4 years ago, and it's amazing what they built up. We'll be having a workshop May 18th at his place, NCAT and RMA. It's a southern region RMA, but RMA nonetheless. So if you're interested in that, just contact NCAT. But the pens are 10 by 12, and they're 6 foot tall. I'm over 6 foot tall. I don't want to be crawling on my hands and knees, especially if large chickens have been manuring on the ground. So they're tall. They also let through a lot of air. You can see the orientation here. those pens are facing the west, which is where we get most of our storms, and from the south is the other area. So western winds can blow right through. And then if you look, I've got a little arrow. The winds come through, they blow right through. If winds out of the south can hit, and it's pretty aerodynamic. With these sides down, we can roll these sides up. You see the PVC here, and so it's just a wooden frame with PVC and some chicken wire. They're fairly heavy. I can move them easily with the use of this dolly down here, which is similar to what Joel Salatin uses. I can move them easily. My wife can move them. I've had fairly small people use them, 13-year-olds. It can be a little onerous. It can be difficult for them to move, but you know, a typical strong person can do it really easy. They've survived 70-mile-an-hour winds. If you look right here, there's actually a space. That brace, in between that brace and this corner, is a great place to drive a rebar bar if you know high winds or severe storms are coming through. We've had 50 to 70-mile-an-hour winds that are lease land in the middle of the night that just popped up, and all of our pens were in place. So they're pretty sturdy when it comes to winds. They've got these roll-up sides here, so we can take this tarp, roll it up, and that lets a lot of airflow through. And then in the summer and then in the winter, when there's frost on the ground, we can roll that up, and that lets sun come through. They've got the automatic waters, and it runs about $300 per pin with the waters, the tarps over them, everything. And we use a big 50-pound feeder, which is this red one right here, and in each one. And the reason we do that is so I dump 50 pounds of feed in for my record keeping. That way I'm not trying to estimate how much gets fed. We use 50-pound sacks, dumps in, and then I know exactly how much I fed each pen and each batch of broilers. So we raise a variety called the Cobb 500. There's all kinds of varieties. We're not going to talk about that because you could get lost in the weeds, but it's a good bird. The 300 series as well, but any type of Cornish cross does pretty well on pasture. The Cornish cross is, like we said, this white bird, and they're not perfect, but they do a good job. And the key to them is nutrition and management. If you have poor nutrition, if you have poor management, or you're not quite sure, you haven't worked out all the kinks, you may see some problems. We initially got started, had massive mortalities. I blamed it on Cornish cross. These are the dumbest birds ever. They're horrible. They shouldn't even be alive. They can't survive. They're not chickens. You know, I got myself all worked up, and then we went to another breed, which we'll see, and had great success. Well, to do our cut-up markets for the grocery stores, we had to do the Cornish cross, and so when we tried again, well, guess what happened? No mortalities in that, and the reason was because I'd become a better farmer, and we'd also solved that nutrition problem by going to the Highland feeds. We actually had the local feed was pretty poor nutritionally. I think the birds are decent foragers. The earlier you get them, like we said, the better that they do, the more time they have to learn to eat pasture. They're an advantage of the Cornish cross is that they're readily available. We take them to 9 weeks, and that's because at that 9 week, they really put on a lot of meat. They're not as efficient at it, but when you're talking about adding on a pound more chicken, and it may take you, say, a quarter more pound of feed to do that than what it did before, you're talking about, 10 cents, 5 cents, whatever, of feed to make another pound of chicken, which could sell our whole birds market for around $4. So, yeah, it's not as efficient, but I'm still making money without having to start a whole nother batch. I'm just making more money per bird by taking it a little longer. After 9 weeks, they start to get it starts to get issues of like these birds are getting really big in that. So we take them at 9 weeks. Once again, Cornish cross rule when it comes to parts, cut-ups. The biggest problems we have are hatcheries. The hatchery we were using sent a lot of inconsistent birds, and that was the biggest problem we've had the past year with the Cornish cross when we did around 3,000 birds. So now I'm going to go ahead. We're going to look at, we're going to pull up a video It may or may not work. If it doesn't, we'll close out. But this is just a video of a pen move that I took holding a phone while I did it, which should tell you that it's not that hard to move the pins. And hopefully it'll work. We'll give it a time to load. If it doesn't, we'll click on out in that. But these are our Cornish cross. They're as we move them, you can hear the sounds. These birds are about 5 weeks, I think, 5.5. So you can see the dolly in the back over here, right there, and that dolly helps the birds from getting crushed. And it also helps keep the bottom of the pen from snagging on grass or a rock and breaking the bottom. So these birds have learned what foraging, that it's great. We move them, move the pens. They've learned, hey, I got to get to the front of the pen to get the birds, to get all the little insects. So you can see them eating. They're hammering on the insects right now. Some of them you'll start noticing they'll start ripping the seeds off. They're eating the greens. Most of them are really intent though on the bugs right now. And these are the Cornish cross. So do they act like layers? No, but I feel like this is a bird that really does eat. They forage well. Then they'll sit down and they'll just start ripping out chunks of grass and gnawing on that, picking through, just staying busy. Our birds don't eat and eat and eat like a lot of people said, and we know that happened whenever the nutrition was solved. A chicken will eat what it needs, and then it's done. Versus if they are continuously eating, it's because they're not getting everything that they need. So the breed that I was telling you that we switched to, and it's a popular breed, it's becoming increasingly more popular, is the Lava Rouge breed. These were our Freedom Rangers from J&M Hatchery. It's from French genetics stock. Over in France, they've got a well-developed free-range program. These are birds used out of that program. And it was the original bird that we did for broilers. Remember I told you we had horrible experiences with the first batch of Cornish cross that we did. These birds are a great bird for beginners. They're hardy. They produce a really nice carcass. The dimensions are a little long. You get a little bit more drum and thigh meat versus chicken breast or versus breast, but they taste great. And speaking of which, taste, there's some varieties that plays a role, and diet definitely plays a role. But part of taste too is how old the bird is. As the chicken gets older, it develops a better flavor. The thing with broilers that we have to watch out for is as an older chicken gets too, the tougher it gets. So, once you start going past 12 weeks, you start having some real issues with toughness. And, if it's like chewing an eraser, it doesn't matter how good it is. So that's why like stewing chicken and dumplings is a lot of times used with stewing hens, layers that are past their productivity, past their prime. And those birds make fantastic stock. You can pick bits of meat off, chop it up with a knife, so you don't have to chew it up much. And they make a phenomenal stock, but they're tough as shoe leather. So the Freedom Ranger goes a little bit longer in that, but it's a great bird to get started with. Like I said, we switched because we were getting into the parts market. And these, you'll see this netting, that's electric poultry netting, that's not well put up. But it's we used to do that. We stopped because of hawks. I was having the hawks moved in and started taking out a bunch of these birds right before they went to the processor, which is the worst time to lose a meat bird, is when you have everything in it. We found that about 10 weeks or so, you get the same body size, different proportions, but same general body size as 7 to 8 weeks for a Cornish cross, or 8 weeks for a Cornish cross. And we're actually going to be doing on our farm some studies with the University of Arkansas, where we're going to raise Cornish cross and Freedom Rangers side by side, apply the scientific method, and get some good data for you guys. So if you'd like to see that data, stay tuned, and it should probably be out this upcoming winter. So this is our cost of broiler production. We put a lot of margins when we do cost. We always round things up. We'll throw on an extra buck or that. So this feed cost, our feed we assume this is off our feed conversion ratios and that, but we're going to say $4 per bird. Okay. Well, our processing, and this is to get around a 4-pound bird, chicken carcass dressed. We say our processing is about 450. Well, it is 450 for cut up, and we only cut up 2/3 of our birds. The others are about the whole bird. It's 250 a bird, and so what that does is it builds in a safety margin in case we lose a lot of birds, or in case my numbers are off somewhere else. So a lot of our birds, this number right here, the 450 would only be 250. Gas is factored in. That's pretty high, and now it takes the same amount of gas to take one bird to the processor as it does 400 just about. Chick cost is a little high. That's higher than what we're going to pay. The shelter and the infrastructure. The shelter are the pens, the Hopkin pens. The infrastructure is stuff like fencing or the watering systems on the lease land. And really, like doing 10,000 birds this year, this will more than pay for everything. But when we do our planning, we try to break even the first year. That way we don't get caught in a lot of debt. And we actually try to make a profit the first year. But I really suggest don't be optimistic when it goes to your planning or your costs. Always be a pessimist when it comes to that kind of stuff, because nature has a habit of throwing curveballs, life has a habit of throwing curveballs. Labels, and so we say 1130 a bird. It's actually quite a bit lower than that, but that's what I plan on when I do kind of risk assessments or that kind of stuff for the farm. When I'm trying to project sales and what we can and can't do, come up with capital. You got to pour all this money into these birds before you get it back. So I'm going to have $11.30 in a bird before I get anything back. So if I'm planning on raising 200 birds or 1,000 birds or 50 birds, this is really important, because I have to, if I'm going to do 1,000 bird or 100 birds, say, that means I have to have $1,100, $1,130. Do I have that money? Because that's what it's going to take. So I don't want to start 100 birds off if I don't have that money. And you got to do this for yourself. And the best way to do it is to get these numbers is do a small batch, and just take real good records. So, and this is what we sell though. So we got the, say, $11 into it. And what we got here is these are just we record everything on our farm, and so we get packages back. This is the data we've taken over the year. When we do it, we get a cut, which is our breast, boneless, skinless breast, tenders, thighs, drums, wings, backs, which we use for stock, liver, hearts, etc. This is a percent of the bird that it yields. We're going to say on average we have a 4.35 carcass weight. That's what we get at 8 weeks, and we take birds out to 9 weeks, so it's much higher. But that's another margin of safety that I build in by cutting out that additional week. But I factor in the feed costs like I am going to have that. And so our breast, the important thing to look here at the yield is that the two cuts that give us the most amount are the chicken backs and the breast, the boneless, skinless breast. So that's something you got to calculate. You got to take into consideration. And so for this, we get $9 a pound. Chicken breast, our chicken breast is expensive, and our tenders are expensive. We consider them convenient cuts. One of our values is we want to try to make it so that good food isn't only affordable by rich people. So you can get a GMO Pasture drumstick for about $3.25 a pound, which in a lot of farmers markets, the lettuce is more expensive than that. This is USDA inspected, a pound of chicken, right? Okay, the backs is what, for people that are really on a budget, this makes a phenomenal nutritious stock. I mean, it's amber, it's just beautiful. I mean, you throw some greens, some taters in it, a little bit of pasta or white beans, and you've got a great meal that'll feed a whole army of kids, and they'll like because it's delicious. And so that's $1 a pound. The one thing you have to consider, though, when you start going into the cut-up market, we found this out the hard way, is that it's easy to sell certain things. We have markets, and these are our direct prices. They're not our wholesale prices. But I can sell the fire out of chicken thighs. Um, I mean, people, they love our chicken thighs. I could sell if I could grow a chicken that was nothing but thighs, I'd be a rich man. What I can't sell a lot of are my backs. And so when you've got, 2 tons worth of backs in storage, that's something to factor into. And that's a problem that we're still trying to figure out as we go into this year with doing 8 to 10,000 birds. And then also, this is our whole price for a whole chicken per pound. So these are the totals if we were to direct sell at the farmer's market, um, and that for GMO-free pasture raised chicken. Our total for a cut up bird is about 19 or $20. Our total for a whole bird is about $2 less. And if you'll remember, it takes $2 less in processing to do a whole bird. So that really, we're breaking even. There's just a lot more labor on the parts. But the deal is I can sell a lot more birds if I sell parts. So when you look at the $11 that we projected earlier, you're looking at, you're looking at about 6, 8, 5, however pessimistic you want to be, net per bird. So we're never this rosy. We always cut it down to, let's assume $3 a bird or $4. But if you know all this, once you know how much you can net per bird on average, that helps you figure out how many birds do I have to live, or how many birds do I have to raise, excuse me, to farm full time, to meet the current salary that I have. And starts giving you the data to figure out what you got to do to maybe get out on a farm full time. So now I'm going to look real quick at the broiler feed consumption rate. And why am I doing this? Because broilers eat a lot, okay? And I really don't. If you start off, one of the things that can catch you off guard is how much the birds eat in the final days. So over here we got a graph. This is for, I don't know how many broilers, 200 broilers or so. You look at, and then you look at each one of these dots is a 50-pound sack of feed, and that thing just whoop, skyrockets. So these birds ate, close to a ton and a half of feed. That's a lot of feed. And when you do it, you can't skip on quality or quantity. It's very tempting to buy the cheaper feed. You will shoot yourself in the foot and drive yourself out of business. And let me qualify that. By cheaper, I mean cheaper in terms of quality. You can buy organic feed that's worse than the conventional stuff they sell at the feed store. I've seen horrible organic chicken feed. But you can buy conventional stuff that is awesome. It just really depends on how old the feed is, who's milling it, what ingredients they use, the company that makes it. Our feed smells. I've caught my kids eating it. I've caught the dogs eating it. I've caught the interns eating it. Our feed smells wonderful. It smells like it would make a really great pan of cornbread. So so I know the chickens will love it. Compared to the feed that we had before, which was stale, I taste our feed. It didn't taste good. If you can't stand eating it, your birds won't either. So the big thing about this, don't get caught off guard at the end in terms of how much it's going to take to get the birds finished. So for the broiler profits, we're saying we net $7 a bird. That can just depend on a lot of things. Cut-ups are harder. It's more inventory, more work, but you get once the whole bird market's full, you may have to go into cut-ups. You can get a backlog of some cuts like backs. The biggest cost is going to be feed and processing. So those are the two areas that you need to do the most research in. It's easy to worry about breeds and that kind of stuff, but the two things that are going to bite you once you start up a business, try to make money, are feed and processing. Transportation, really key point. How are you going to get, where are you going to store your birds? How are you going to haul them from the processor? Don't be like us. And the night before we took our first batch, think, how are we going to get these birds to the processor? And that was interesting because I realized that about 10 o'clock at night. So, plan things out, but transportation's a big one. And on our broilers, they really carry the load of the infrastructure, tractor maintenance, fencing for all the other enterprise. our farm pivots around the core that is broilers, and so it also created a feed business for us. If you bring in great feed, sometimes you can sell it, and that's been pretty critical to us. The record keeping is a real big deal. You need to be confident that you're making a profit. You need to know it, and it helps with decision making as you expand, and especially wholesale markets where you're negotiating a price. You got to make sure that the price you negotiate isn't below the cost of production, so you're losing money with every sale, or that you're working yourself to death for a couple of pennies. You got to keep your mortality down, especially late. Man, when you got broilers dropping dead on the way to the processors, it's I mean, you got that $11. You just lost $11 in dead meat. That's now dog food at the best. And the cash flow demands, on infrastructure, operating costs, which are the birds, the feed. For instance, we're doing more than this, but say we're doing 300 birds per week. Well, 9 weeks before I get the first batch of birds ready, I'm going to have $18,000 tied up in chickens out on pasture before I get my first check. So that's money I have to have. And so don't grow too big too fast. Fast is foolish, slow is wise when you're getting into the pasture poultry business. Now we're going to quickly cover laying hens. We're done with the broilers. Sayonara, buddies. We're moving on to laying hens. So this is one of our first egg mobiles. It has about the 200 birds that we're able to have out here. This is our lease land. You notice there's no fences in that because it just gotten started. This is, I think, early summer. All the fescues went to seed. It's pretty neat, though. You can see the effect that chickens do have an effect on pasture. And so we're moving them in that. So layers generally are great foragers. When they start laying, they're 5 months to 6 to 8 months, depending on breed, and that. They do a great job of foraging. Markets really like brown eggs. That may not be true everywhere, but for most of the United States, brown eggs are the way to go. People associate them with wholesomeness, with down farm goodness, all that kind of stuff. I think it's one of the easiest poultry to grow. The birds are very hardy. They're very forgiving in that, and they're a great bird to learn poultry with, just to get basic production skills. There's ready markets for eggs. Everybody loves farm eggs. The downside, though, with laying hens is you can make money with laying chickens. It's hard to make a lot of money with laying chickens, which is why laying houses these days are double storied. You got 100,000 birds in there, even the organic ones. Like it's difficult to make money with laying hens because they eat a lot of feed and then all the labor involved with the eggs. So key points for profitability with the layers are breed selection. And we've got a slide that looks at this, but it's really important that you get a good breed. The heritage breeds are great. If you want a pet or if you want a hobby or maybe even if you like to do some breeding work to breed a lot of these breeds back up to where they can be efficient and convert feed into eggs at a real good clip, a profitable clip. But when you're talking, and we'll look at this in a second, it really makes a difference on your breed in that. So you got to keep track of your performance in that. You got to know your costs. How much am I feeding these birds? You'd be surprised how many people don't even know how many chickens they have. They don't know how much they feed their birds. They don't know what their feed bill is. Nutrition is a big deal with layer hens. They'll eat, and once they get everything they need, they stop eating. So you may have a cheaper price feed that's also cheaper in quality, and they just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and it costs you more than if you gave them a high quality feed. You can't starve profits into a poultry flock, whether it be meat birds or layers. And then also nutrition. Poultry laying hens need a lot of calcium, which is good for your pastures because in effect they put lime down on your pastures and lime the soil and make your pH better. Lighting does play a role in egg production, a very big role. If the birds are seasonal, they want to hatch chickens out in the wild, or in nature, they want to hatch their their chicks when it's warming up, when there's lots of bugs and stuff for them to eat. And so lighting does play an effect. You can do artificial lightning or lighting in the winter to really kind of, as the daylight decreases, you can actually increase it. It doesn't take a lot of light. Uh, the problem with that though is you can really throw them off if your lighting schedule gets interrupted. And overwintering, you got to think about this. It may be over summering where you're at. What are you going to do when the pastures go dormant? And the chickens will keep scratching, keep pecking. They'll destroy a pasture. We actually stick our birds in hoop houses. It's a system we're kind of trying to figure out. And it's worked real well. It keeps them dry, saves our pastures. We have the hoop houses at the house, so chores are real easy in the winter. And then culling. Every after each molt, when the bird replaces its feathers, so after about generally each year, that flock can lose, or that bird can lose 20% of its laying efficiency. That eats into your profits whenever it's a margins game to start off with, making money off layers. So a lot of producers cull in the second year because after that the birds are breaking even at best. In that, definitely you can't keep a hen out to its natural life and try to and be a business. Now you can just and have a pet, that's fine, but it's not a farming business. You're going to have to look at culling and what do you do with that bird? Do you sell it as stock? Do you compost them? Do you we feed ours to the dogs and to our livestock guardian dogs and that. But that is something that has to be addressed. So breeds. We'll spend a little bit of time here. There's high production commercial breeds, and you can see the brown egg layers. The sex link. Sex link means that when the chicks hatch, their color gives them away as to whether or not they're male or female, if they're going to be a rooster or a hen. And when we say the sex links, a lot of times people talk about these as hybrid birds. Now, when we say hybrid bird, we don't mean that a chicken is crossed with a giraffe or corn or something. That's not what we mean by hybrid. We mean that two breeds are crossed or are bred together, and that mating in between the two breeds gives a consistent offspring, and that offspring, is a sex link. Okay, now if those hens were to go on and hatch out other chicks, the chicks would still be able to lay in that, but they'd be all over the map in terms of productivity. Breed selection is really important. It's kind of like there are dogs that are bred to fight bears and lions, like Great Pyrenees and mastiffs and that kind of stuff. Then there's dogs that are like teacup poodles or chihuahuas or whatever they are. I don't know why people have them, but they do. Okay, so if you're going out to fight a bear, do you want the little teacup thing that can fit in your hand, or do you want a massive 150-pound dog that has a thick coat and is bred with centuries of fighting ability? So obviously breed plays a part and a critical role. And so then you also have white egg, the Leghorn hybrids, which are the production types. And then you also have some breeds like the Barred Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, other 50 Airs layers that 50, 60, 70 years ago, these birds were used in commercial egg production. And with a little bit of work, breeding work, through help of groups like the ALBC, the American Livestock Breed Conservancy, you can select they've got literature on how do you select to maximize production. These birds, you can still make money with these birds. So you see brown and white egg layers. So this is just a different profit projections by breed. If a great book for you to have is Success with Baby Chicks from Norton Creek Press down here. It's definitely worth whatever you'll pay. It's not an expensive book to start off with. A lot of good info. I kind of adapted this off of some of Robert's. It's off a table in Robert's book. Highly suggest you get that book. So, but this is just to show you the impact breeds can have on your pocketbook. We're assuming that it costs $6 to raise a chicken up to lay. About 5 months, 6 months. They eat, speed. And these are real rough estimates, but a non-commercial breed, these might be like a Buff Orpington or just a Russian Orloff or any of the heritage breeds that you see. Well, it lays 8 dozen eggs a year. Sell it for I think that's like a $3, 3.25 or something a dozen. So, so you sell $26 per hen. Well, it costs you about $21 to feed that hen. And when you add on the cost of the pullets, that means you're actually losing money per hen. Okay, if one of those 50 airs breeds, like the Barred Rocks or the Rhode Island Reds, wow, you get twice as much production because they've been selected for laying. Boom, $52 a hen. Feed costs are just about the same, yet you're making close to $20 per hen. That's pretty good. The modern hybrids, like your sex links, you're cranking out more sales for just a little bit more feed, and you're getting more bang for your buck. So all this is just to give you an idea, and we're trying to really hit home that breed selection plays a critical role in making money when layers are a game of margins anyways. You really got to track your profits. These are one of the spreadsheets we hang up in the eggmobile or that, and every day we write, you can't see it, but we write how many eggs did we collect, how many chickens, which is whatever it was the day before, and if there's been a loss, a dead one, or somebody ate, predator came in, like a hawk or something, and made a kill. And then later on, I type this into a spreadsheet, and you get your lay rate in that. So, and then at the end, I've got all kinds of stuff where you look at, and then we also write whenever we open up a 50-pound sack of feed. And I've got a spreadsheet where it actually tells you how much you make. You put your carton cost. I can send that to you as an Atra case if you contact us at Atra. But record keeping's if it was critical with the broilers, it's indispensable with the layers to make a profit in that. So we talk about lay rate, and that lay rate's great because you can compare. It's a percentage of your flock, so it doesn't matter. You can compare 20 birds to 2,000 birds lay rate, and that's good to get an idea of seasonality, that kind of stuff. And allows answers to, am I making money? Is this even worth it? What's my feed conversion? We run between a 3 to 5 to 1 per dozen feed conversion. So 3 to 5 pounds of feed are converted to a dozen eggs. And it lets you know management issues. We make notes of hawk attacks. And looking back, I didn't realize they were that bad till I looked through my records. So planning, for projections. If I know that my lowest month is in December and I have a 40% lay or 30% or 1% or 90%, whatever, I can project. I can let my wholesale customers know. I can let my other customers know I'm not going to have a lot of eggs, or if a customer wants 100 dozen eggs, well, if I know how many percent, what my lay rate's going to be, I can know, well, how many birds I got to raise to make sure I can meet that customer's demand. This is one of the restaurants we sell eggs to. Phenomenal place. But common costs. You're brooding and housing. You don't take baby chicks and throw them out on pasture. You got to raise them up in the brooder, and getting them to the point of lay. How much feed chick cost. The feed, even while they're producing, and you get them up to lay. Then packing and grading. You got to buy cartons. Got to cooling and washing and candling. Just all the costs of grading and labor. We spend a lot more time on our layers. Well, we spend about equal time on layers and broilers during the year, but egg sales make up less than 10% of our farm income, and the broilers make up almost half. But yet it's the same amount of time. The advantage, though, being that most of our meat accounts typically come because of egg sales. So there's a pro and con definitely to layers, to the amount of work and what you get out of them. You got to be careful with housing. Just real quick, you got to be careful with costs. You don't want to build a chicken Taj Mahal because you got to pay for that chicken Taj Mahal, and that. So your housing needs to be functional and effective, yet not cost an arm and a leg. It needs to be cost effective. Fixed versus mobile. We go with eggmobiles. If you go with the fixed housing, if you're doing any type of scale, you're going to have problems with, one, the chickens will deposit most of their manure around the house. So some areas are going to get real high fertility, other areas won't. They're going to graze out all the good stuff close by because they don't want to walk 100 yards when they can get it a foot away. You're going to have bare patches start. Then you're going to have a whole bunch of manure building up that you'll either have to scrape with a box blade or shovel, which definitely isn't pleasant. So we go with the mobile housing, um, and plan for wintering. It's great for the pasture because it's not growing. You don't want so you're not killing plants. When the birds go and peck and scratch on dormant plants, it kills them. They can't recover. And so it's also great for the birds because your birds aren't out there in the snow or the rain or the freezing rain or the cold, wet rain or the driving wind. And chickens really need dryness versus warmth. They've got feathers. They've been designed. They can stay snug as a bug in a rug, or as a chicken in an eggmobile. How about that? As they go ahead and if as long as they're dry. So we use a hoop house, which are those, the tomato picture earlier. It's a high tunnel design, and it's worked out fantastic. And so we also use sacrifice paddocks in the past. If you're going to overwinter your hen, maybe you just park your eggmobile under a pole barn, or maybe just park your eggmobile in a confined area and throw down a bunch of hay and straw. That's fine, but just have a plan where they're in an area where you're limiting the impacts. Nutrition, once again, don't skip. You can't starve profits into poultry. And especially with the pullets, if you skimp before they lay eggs, it affects them for the rest of their laying career. If you shortcut them when they're growing, it's going to have implications until you cull that bird. The birds, they stay warm by eating, and so if it's cold, if they're in the wind, if they're wet, they're going to eat a lot more feed, and expect more feed to be consumed in the winter. Calcium is important. A lot of times oyster shell. I suggest you supplement with oyster shell. If you see like your eggs are just breaking a lot, put in oyster shell. And if they really need it, they will just go through it like mad, and then it'll level off and you'll hardly have to put anything in there. But I suggest always having calcium supplement available. They can fill their calcium need that way. And good pasture. The layers are great foragers. There's been a lot of studies. It's called free choice feeding, where you put in whole wheat berries, just grains. You have some limestone for the calcium in that, and then and with the mix in it, or with the grain, they may have a vitamin mix. But the birds, when given lush pasture, the birds are able to meet all their laying requirements and not really suffer a beat long term. They perform just as well. The challenge is the cost that goes in to keep top-notch pastures, and if they don't get what they need on pastures, they're going to take it out of their bodies. For calcium, the chickens actually have a bone, and they'll actually rob their bone that they have. Excuse me, they have a bone that they store calcium in. So if there's a calcium deficiency, they start taking it from their bones. And if they're not getting enough calcium, it can get ugly pretty quick. Lighting, like we talked about, very important. It varies throughout the year. Affects egg production. Increase and decrease in production follows lighting. It can induce molting, where they replace all their feathers, and they actually take the protein instead of doing eggs. They stop laying eggs, put it in the feathers. Supplemental lighting can even out production. Definitely something to be considered, but if it's poorly done, it really hurts your laying percentage because they can just stop. It stresses out the birds. And lighting can be really hard to do out on pasture. So other poultry types, you got these are things like turkeys, ducks, and that. So generally, there can be processing problems. Turkeys are big. Ducks do not want to give up their feathers. Neither do geese or other waterfowl. And so processing can be an issue. But generally for turkeys, they're great because they're really aggressive foragers. They'll actually make a line and walk through. You can kind of see them doing it here. But they'll actually, you've seen them they'll walk wing to wing and chase up grasshoppers like that. And just flushing out, make sure they're not missing anything on pasture. Turkeys are great because they're seasonal. Thanksgiving sales, and people will pay more money for turkey per pound than a chicken because it's a special thing. It's a once a year thing. It's great. It's a great time to make some profits. There's a lot of producers that feel like they break the broiler operations, cash flow, the turkeys, and then they really clean up at the end of November and make all their profits for the year. Ducks and waterfowl, great foragers. It's a really high quality, high demand meat, especially with chefs. But plucking can be problematic. Geese eat only grass, which is huge. I mean, you probably want to supplement them some, but they can survive only on grass. So there definitely is potential with these, but they really need to be explored in depth. So the general challenges we're gonna real quick sum up for on pasture. Predators. Everything likes chickens in America, whether it's going through a drive-through or it's going through the forest. It likes chicken. Predators will kill your birds and your profits. We talked about wet weather, like during the winter, but damage to your pasture. They'll compact the soil, tear it up. The birds get cold and wet, more feed equals less profits. Processing, where and how are you going to do it? Is it stable? Can you do it on farm? That's the challenge. And then labor. Moving pens, that takes time. It has to be efficient. Feeding, watering, can you do it without automating? I would say no. Yeah, on any large type of scale. And really, these three, well, predation, labor, and weather, that's why poultry production moved into chicken houses. So if there's a reason for it. So if you want to stay in business long term, you got to figure out how to deal with seasons, predators, and labor. Like we said, predator, everything loves chickens. In that, and so you have to come up with successful strategies. Physical barriers like electric fencing is very effective. Netting. You train your predators. That sounds a little funny, but predators are really territorial, and so once that pack of coyotes or that bobcat knows that Spence's chickens are off the table because I get popped by an electric fence or chased by big white fluffy dogs, when I get in there and attack the chickens, it's not worth it. And so they'll actually keep out other predators because they're territorial. In effect, you train them and they become another layer of defense. Your wood line distance we found is really important, especially with hawks. If you're running birds, 100 foot, 200 foot away from a bunch of big oak trees on the edge of a forest or edge of a field, well, where do the hawks like to roost? So that can play a role. Livestock guardian dogs we found have been really effective, as well as electric fence. You can't shoot or trap your way out of predation problems. We learned this pretty quick. A coyote or a bobcat will be very, very patient to get at a chicken dinner, and they've got 24 hours to figure out how to do it. You don't have 24 hours to sit out there, and you don't want the stress. You can't out fox a fox, by shooting it. So what you want to do are develop things like the livestock guardian dogs, the fencing, things that'll be on the job all the time while you go live your life and do other things on the farm. The control method really does, though, depend on the predators. Controlling hawks, controlling owls, controlling whatever is different than controlling a coyote or a skunk. So you're going to have to come up with individual solutions as the problems arise. One of the advantages of doing things out on pasture is you can do multi-species grazing. You can graze ruminants with that mow the grass before the chickens, or you can send the chickens ahead of the ruminants. The poultry will spread manure, cow manure. They'll pick through and eat face flies and things that are other big problems with cows. They'll eat all the larvae if you time it right. For the parasitic larvae that's in the cow pies that would hatch out to flies that would hurt your cattle production. Well, the chickens, it's just a protein boost and it's free. It's a great way to utilize your acreage to its fullest extent. Utilizing it multiple ways means more money. You're paying for that infrastructure as it is. You can raise broilers between orchard and vineyard rows. There's a lot of ways to incorporate them even onto existing farms. Here, we're rotationally grazing our goats in front of our chickens. which was we found pretty cool in that. This was in the drought, but you can see where the goats and the chickens have been and what it looked like before with all this Lespedeza. So just generally, success in pasture poultry. You got to know your costs. Production as a system, you really want to be systematic. Efficiency, reduce labor, and that's not as critical when you're just doing 100 birds, but when you're trying to make a living at it or trying to make some money, you got to be efficient. Hence the automatic water harping in that on my part. Identify good markets and keep the good customers. You know, markets that'll take everything you have but don't want to pay you what you need are not good markets. You need to keep a very low mortality. Birds dying is money that's just getting wasted. And strategic expansion. As you expand, remember all the cash flow issues. Work it out. Will you have enough money to produce that amount of birds without putting yourself in a world of hurt? Got to have solid processing. Transparency with the customer is always great. You know, farm tours maybe, or lots of pictures. We've got a Facebook page, Across Creek Farm. You can look that up on Facebook. Got a lot of pictures, but we get a lot of sales, and we get people that really like what we do and that are really appreciative that we've never met. And it's very easy with social media today in that. So you can check out our Facebook page if you're curious at Across Creek Farm. You got to be a problem solver, and this is a lot of these things are true with all farming, whether it's carrots, cows, or chickens. You know, technical, building pens. I didn't know how to do a lot of this stuff. I didn't know how to work on engines. But all I knew that was technical was how to use machine guns coming out of the Army. And I was a good cook, you know. I'm not a financial guy. I don't like math. I like math, though. I love math when I'm making money. When knowing math and algebra helps me make money, I figured it out. And then you got to be a good marketer. You know, if you don't like talking to people, you got to find somebody that does. You have to have the ability to go in there and sniff and create markets. You know, and that's excellent people skills, and once again, the marketing, you know, high quality products, your farm identity. There's just a lot of ways, like we were saying about our Facebook page, a lot of ways to do that now. It's a lot easier than it used to be. So these birds, 3 weeks old, about to go out on pasture, and I guess we'll finish this up with question is, will you be moving to pasture too? So
Thank you, Spence. Thank you. We have lots of questions. What you're seeing now is for those who are close to Montana or in Montana, this project that funded this webinar today, which was national in scope, is also part of a regional project in the western part of the United States, and specifically in Montana. And we're going to have some workshops. The first one is going to be in March, and that is in Great Falls, and we actually have a location. Again, contact NCAT for this. Everyone will be emailed information about these workshops from this webinar. We have your emails from signing in, so you will get an invitation, particularly if you're in Montana or the region. If you want to travel all the way this summer, although Montana is beautiful in the summer, so I welcome. We're going to have in different parts of Montana. Some of the speakers have been set, some have not yet. Anyway, we will be working and solidifying all of those. The first one is coming up this next month. So I will turn to questions now, Spence, and there's an awful lot of them, and okay. I'll try to do as many as we can do, and I've tried to group some of them together.
Do we want to put up the real quick the ATRA slide, the question slide, with all the ATRA information?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. Do you have it? I think you have it, don't you?
For some reason it's not up there. It is. Sorry. Okay.
Okay. There it comes. And so again, you can ask questions too when we don't get all of these answers, and we won't be able to answer all of them today. First off, this is available, will probably be available this afternoon or early tomorrow on our website. So yes, with the audio and everything. I'm sorry we didn't get that question. Everybody was concerned about that. I thought we should, anyway, it will be available very, very soon, and so you can listen to it over and over again, including these questions. There was a lot of talk about predators and hawks, a lot of questions about those. People asked about guard dogs, which you mentioned. Somebody asked about scare balloons. So in other words, basically, I guess folks are wondering about how do you deal with hawks? How do you deal with, probably hawks came up more than any,
Yeah.
and obviously the use of guard dogs in training, and even some issues about, like, if you're feeding chickens to your guard dogs, does that mean them eat the chickens, and is it a problem? So maybe a little bit about predation, guard dogs, and hawks.
Yeah, that's good because that means that's where your first problems are always going to be with predators. Um, the hawks is one that we're still working out with fear and trembling, if you will. We This year, what we've noticed, general trends are our hawk problems typically come whenever during drought situations or whenever the other prey um, dries up. We don't have hawk problems typically during spring and summer. Um, and part of that is because you've got full grown layers, and a hawk cannot fly away with a layer. Maybe an eagle can in that, but red-tail hawks, Cooper's hawks, none of those birds can actually fly away with the chicken. And so that's a big thing for them to try to tackle. So they'll go after mice and all that. If they start hitting, you either got one individual who's problematic, or you've got a situation where they're starting to get desperate. And so if it's one individual, like our eggmobile, I'll just lock it up for a day or two, or only let them out in the evening so they can get that forages, like we talked about. If it's a persistent problem, I'll tie a livestock guardian dog up to the eggmobile, and those big dogs, if when a hawk comes down, it makes a lot of commotion. It gets the chickens riled up. That dog will go off. And these things are scary. Our Great Pyrenees, our big male is he's probably around 130 pounds in that, and when he's riled up, he's very intimidating. And so a little 3 or 4 pound red tail will back off pretty quick. So the dogs, I think, are kind of critical. Hawks can be very frustrating. Scare balloons and all that, they learn about that pretty quick. Owls only attack at night, so it's just a matter of having things secure. All your coyotes, foxes, that kind of stuff, the electric netting that you saw us have is pretty critical. That stops that. But having a strong perimeter fence, we run a strong perimeter fence, which we still don't have up yet, but we'll get that up and then run the electric netting around the layers, and that's more to keep the layers in one spot. But between the electric fence, the dogs, and the netting, that keeps out any ground predators. Hawks are the big one that we fight against, and we found just, hey, tie dog up there. The big problem becomes feeding the dog, which you'll have to do at night, and that should stop it. Anyways, there's only so many things I can advocate because hawks are a migratory bird, even though there's probably about 40 of them circling my fields now. Apparently their situation is tentative on life. So if you do happen to have one that runs into some buckshot or birdshot on your farm, don't post it because it is a felony, and we definitely don't advocate that. The livestock guardian dogs, a strong electric fence, will curtail most of your problems.
Thanks. This has again, there was a series of questions in this broad area, and it's going to probably overlap a little bit, Spence, but some of it was the rotations, I guess, with multiple species. You mentioned, obviously, with the goats there, which follows which. Do you actually have the pastured poultry in with the chickens or cows or goats, or do you actually methodology of different species across? There were some questions about health issues and parasites that other species might affect each other, whether it's the chicken affecting the goats or the goats vice versa. Anyway, did you have and people just want a little bit more discussion in general about, I guess, how often do you move, and
Yeah.
how do you judge those kinds of things in terms of utilizing pasture well?
Yeah, well, the big thing, I put it back on the goat picture. This was in a real bad drought last year, which we're just starting to acquiesce and call drought summer. So you see the goats, you see all this stuff right here. the real leafy stuff, that's Lespedeza. I can't range chickens through there. And you can see where it's even starting to grow back here and where the goats really and chickens have stripped it out. So we actually use the goats in this year to knock down the Lespedeza. We got better land for chickens, so we don't have to do that anymore. Typically use ruminants in front um, in that, and then you could probably follow hogs behind the chickens if you really had to. But the ruminants in front, Joel Salatin uses layers about 3 days behind or 2 days behind his beef cattle. The cattle will graze it down to a good height for the poultry, and then the layers really hit the cow patties and take care of the fly problems. As a cow actually drops its manure bomb, the flies lay their eggs as it's heading down to the earth in the manure, which is pretty incredible. And then it takes 3 or 4 days for the larvae to emerge and turn into adult flies. And so he tries to time it so the larvae are a good plump chickeny treat, and chickens will destroy the piles, getting those larvae. So it stops the parasitic flies, um, but it also gives a great protein boost to the chickens and produces wonderful eggs in that. So the other thing with we're talking about rotations, and that is that you really there's no hard and fast rule. So for the broilers, a lot of it depends on the time of year. There, for us, there's springtime. I can't keep up with the grass. That's why folks make hay and get several cuttings. But when that first spring forage comes on, we can't keep up, in that. So um, versus the summer when everything goes dormant, it's really easy to overgraze, or in winter when everything is dormant, it's really easy to overgraze. So really, rotation is just based on you getting some experience and how the grass responds. You want the grass to be regrowing a good bit before the birds eat it, and that. So or else if the grass has been mowed down and then you turn chickens on it again and they hit it again when it's just starting to throw back up leaves, you'll kill that plant or that grass over pretty quickly. So rotation's actually just more about you eyeballing it, and keep in fact that like layers are going to be a lot harder on pasture than broilers because the layers are going to scratch a lot more, and they're more ornery. They've got stronger. They're older, so they got stronger foraging instincts. In that, and like turkeys are real big birds, and so if it's wet outside, a 30-pound tom or a 10-pound turkey walking around in when the ground's wet is going to tear it up a lot more than a 3-week or 3-month-old chicken pullet that's maybe a pound or two. So we move them in the evenings, and then we move them in the mornings. Now the little broilers, when they're small, excuse me, we don't have to move them as much because it takes them a lot longer to get to really mow that area in the hoop pen. And so, but as they get older, mostly the reason we move them is there's two reasons: to get access to new grass, and because those broilers, when you got 60, 70 broilers in a pen, they will fill that pen up with manure. And so it's a sanitation issue. And also we do it in the evening, like we were saying, that's when they really graze. But also it gives them a clean sheet, so to speak, to go ahead and sheet over with manure. And incidentally, we were talking about the hawks. That's the reason we went to the pens. I know I mentioned that, but for broilers, you can't, man, the hawks, they're just sitting ducks. The layer can at least run. They're pretty alert. The broilers really, they're not old enough. It's like having a toddler walk out in the jungle. They're not aware enough to be able to know there's a lion out there or a tiger. So that's why we went to the hoop design, and we don't lose any broilers with those hoop designs. I don't know why things don't dig under them, and that's without having any pasture fencing or perimeter fencing or livestock guardian dogs at our lease land yet.
Thanks. Just quickly on that one. So do you mow? This was actually so. Do you mow at all grass forage, like you say, you're keeping ahead of it in the spring? Is that something beneficial to do or not?
Yeah. We don't. And as you can see here in this picture, we let the birds do that. One thing we're trying to improve pastures, one, spending time on a tractor, while initially it's fun, it gets old pretty quick. And two, that's a lot of gas to mow, and the more I use my tractor, the more it seems to break down. And that. So uh, we actually just let the birds knock stuff down. At some point, I can see using other livestock like hogs, maybe, or I don't know. But we move those pins. I've moved them in 2 foot, 3 foot tall grass, and what that does is it knocks the grass down with the pin, and and so the birds will eat a lot of seeds and that kind of stuff on the seed heads. They love those. But another thing it does too is when you knock all those stems down, feed wise, those stems are worthless just about. They don't have much goodness in them. All the goodness is in the seeds now. And so when you knock all those seed stalks and that, and they're high in carbon, then you put a layer of chicken manure, which is high on nitrogen. You we see composting that happens, like sheet composting that happens on top. It breaks down very quickly, and then it creates a good bed for new seeds to come up, especially in the summer. Our stuff goes to seed in early summer, late spring, and as we knock it down, we'll have more stuff growing up because we're essentially mulching the soil and creating a more hospitable environment for new plants or the existing plants throughout the summer. That's kind of what I figure is going on, but we don't specifically mow or anything. If I had grass-fed beef, we may do something, but the broilers, really, I feel they almost do mob grazing, if you're familiar with that, which is why I think our Cornish crossbirds eat so much. We saw when we moved them, they all run up to the front in that video, and they're just trying to grab it before the next guy grabs it. So I think you get better forage consumption in the broiler pens, but also you can knock down and utilize forages that the chickens wouldn't eat otherwise.
Thanks. Now I get into a whole bunch of questions that were obviously about the topic too here, profitability. So there were some very specific questions: profit per bird, uh, hours per bird, cost per birds, processing cost per birds, wholesale versus retail questions. There was really a particular question too that came up a couple times. They noted that in your presentation you talked about expenses of labor for laying operation, but didn't of labor for the pasture, for the broiler operation. So there were some of those issues. So maybe you could speak in general. Again, there were some specifics there. I know you did put some specifics up later when these questions were asked. I guess there was, and then there's associated things you doing this cut up stuff. And then somebody said, what about feet? There's some extra, do you sell your feet? That kind of thing. So let's maybe get into a little bit of just the profitability in general question.
Yeah, let me address labor. Like I look at labor on the farm, we kind of look at how labor is what percentage of time am I working? Am I working on a particular enterprise? I don't. When I first got started off, I tried to figure out, well, what am I making per hour in that, and it just kind of started to just get silly, and I got tired of dealing with it. And this is really, to me, like when I was in the Army, we had 36-hour patrols or missions when I was in Iraq, which I slept a couple hours if that, and that's typical for that lifestyle. Um, Roughnecks that work on drill rigs. I mean, truck drivers. Different jobs have different requirements, and I really enjoyed being a soldier, and I wasn't too lucky at it though, and that. But I did enjoy it, and the same is true with farming. I like working out here, and I can bring my kids in that, so I don't worry so much how much time I put into it per hour. I just look and see, do I get the other things that I want in my life, which for me is time with my family, time with friends. We're really involved with our local church, that we go to. So do I have time to do the things that I want to do in my life that are important? And the answer is yes. And I'm making money. And am I making the money that I want? Well, hopefully, we're moving up to that. So that's how I approach labor, and you may not approach it like that, and that's fine. But that's my personal thing. If I can go to Iraq and almost get blown up for $1 an hour, I think is what we calculated at one time. 30,000, less than $30,000, then farming and making over $30,000 doesn't seem too bad in comparison. So that's my take on the labor thing. But realistically, like we were saying, layers make up 10% of the farm profits, and the broilers do 40 to 50% of the farm profits, but or excuse me, sales. So we're you know, but if I'm spending the same amount of time on each, that's something that causes concern. Now, at the same time, the layers are less. We've spent less time developing that, so there's all kinds of things that go into that. Um, when it comes down to the net per bird, and all that, and how we make money, I've got some spreadsheets that I can send people individually if they'll call the ATRA hotline, and just specify whether you want the broiler or whether you want the layer sheet, in that. And I can send you the record keeping forms if you have Excel. That's one of the big ways that we do that. So, but yeah, you got to keep track of it, and it'll fluctuate. But if you look at the end of the year, you can figure out on average what you make per bird, in that. For processing's all over the map, just depending where you're at. There's places that are cheaper than what I get. There's places that are more expensive. If you go to the poultry processing database on the ATRA website, um, typically whenever I find a place, I call them, I talk to them, and I try to get their prices up. But 250 for a whole bird is very reasonable. You will find it cheaper. You'll find it much more expensive. But there's some new options too. David Schaefer, who's at I think Featherman Poultry Processing. They're out of Jamesport, Missouri. He's developing this processor in a box, so to speak. It'll be like $50,000-$60,000 a Connex, but it'll be a USDA inspected cookie cutter processing plant, which would be huge for a lot of areas. Because once you go USDA, you're out of all the processing regulations with the state. I mean, it's a federal, you can ship across state lines, but the processing and that those we've got a great processing publication, by the way, poultry processing, but those are all probably best handled individually. And I would strongly suggest doing a business plan. If you're in Louisiana or Arkansas, we'll be doing entire workshops over the financials of this. And we have people drive down from Colorado and that. Jeff, I know you all will be covering that in at least some of your workshops, if you're up in the Montana region. And NCAT does a lot of other stuff, conferences and that, so be on the lookout for that.
Maybe just the one thing, again, you having the cut up and the whole birds, and perhaps a little on the wholesale versus the retail.
Okay.
Where would you go? Would you like move to all wholesale? Would that be better for profitability, or do you have to do direct and wholesale, that kind of division?
Yeah, we like both. That's a great question, by the way. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. There are so many poultry jokes you can make on this subject, but you really don't. And so, like for us, time is a big issue. Like those things that I talked about were like my family, and I work at NCAT part time, and so obviously doing this kind of thing. The wholesale market allows me to do that, because I drop product off once a week and get a check in a week or two. Now we do direct sales. We have a private market that we sell at. It's a mail-in market. It's only 3 hours on Saturday. I can typically get like 4-digit sales there. We're pretty close to it. It's definitely worth the 3 hours. I get a much better return per bird on it, and that, but it takes a lot of time. Even just the direct sales, and you got to deal with questions, which I don't mind, but you deal with people For every 30 people that are awesome, you'll have that one guy that'll want to talk your ear off and not buy anything. And, so we moved to the wholesale. We were selling at a farmer's market where it's like on Saturday morning, I got to get up 4, 5, be there before 7, and it's the end of the world if I left before noon. And so that in and of itself was a full-time job. I could sell a lot of food there, but it's not worth it on time expense. And especially at that point in our life, at this particular farmer's market, I was working 40, 45, 50 hours a week. I didn't have the energy or time. And when I got home on Saturday, there was from market, it was hot. There was a day's worth of chores to do. My family, I didn't have, I still needed to deal with them, but the only thing I wanted to do was get something to eat and go sleep. So, you really have to figure out what works best for you, and that. But getting started, most people start off on the direct marketing. But when you start moving up sales wise, the restaurants are really good. And the great thing about the restaurants or the grocery stores, etc., is it doesn't matter if you have a rainy day on your delivery, other than maybe causing some issues with transportation or unloading. A farmer's market, if stormy weather moves in, you're sunk, and now you got to store all that chicken. Can you store it till your next market in that? Whereas the wholesale markets, we go straight from the processor and drop it off, and which is awesome. So, but those are some of the issues on your price. You got to come down on for wholesale. And I have markets that I'd really like to sell at restaurants, but the conventional stuff they can get even at my wholesale prices, which sometimes are half of what my other prices are, or just about. It's still if I were to cut my price in half, they're getting chicken breast for $1.50 a pound. I can't compete with that. So some places want to do an all local product, some places want to try their best, and some places it's just about making money, and that's great. I mean, we're about making money too. So uh, anyways, it's just kind of interesting how it all works out.
Yeah, and then let's go to feed. There's a lot of questions around feed. Um, Obviously, the mention of the non-GMO brought up, where do you get non-GMO? How do you know it's non-GMO? Is that soybean? Is that corn too? Um, you did mention the quality of feed and that being important. Other people are talking about protein sources. Do you grow your own? And would you recommend that, growing your own feed to a certain extent? I know you don't personally, just from
Right.
knowing you, but people are asking about that as an alternative, and will that make it cheaper? Um, the GMO I'm trying to think of the asked. There's kind of a selection in there in terms of these feed issues. Oh, storing feed, volume. Do you buy in big volumes and store? What do you store in? Those kinds of issues around, I guess, moving feed, buying feed, dealing with quality feed and cost, I suppose, at the end of the day with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've gotten smart and started to write some of these down.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know. I'm sorry. I'm kind of
No,
going
no, this
across the
this is
several
working
different
great. Yeah.
individual questions to try to
Okay.
overview them.
Let's start on where to get GMO free feed. We do have an organic. I'm not sure if it's organic and GMO free, but organic feed's really high, and I really do. We're all about sustainable. I've got in training like a lot of ATRA staff as an organic livestock inspector. I've worked on the NOP. I like organics. There's definitely a place. I would say getting started with pastured poultry, organics is not the place. You're going to lose birds, and man, you're looking at doubling or tripling your feed input. And also, you saw my prices. I mean, what if I had to double those? Would your market support that? So, but the GMO free feed, we really like. It gives that nice in between conventional feed and organic. You can have GMO free, and the price, it kind of justifies that price. We actually saved a little bit of money on feed costs because it's so efficient. Um, we get our feed from Highland Feeds, and just as a full disclosure, I'm actually a distributor for them. And I became a distributor because I quickly realized if I can pack out a semi-load, I can get what I need, sell the rest, make a small profit per bag. But, if I sell 15 tons and make $1 a sack, well, that's, $500, $600 for a day's worth of work. Everybody shows up, and they couldn't do that on their own. And it drives the cost way down. I mean, you're getting bulk producer prices or as low as you can get it. So that's what I did with Highland. I know they've got a mill in Ohio. They've got one in Pennsylvania. I think they're looking at setting one up out west. There's also Modesto Milling. I don't know if they do anything, and there's one in Washington. So you have to look around. Highland Naturals would be a great place to start. Dan Masters is the owner, and if he can't do it, he could probably point you in the right direction. But shipping, and corn shipping is a concern, and the way you minimize that is buying in bulk. And if you have a bunch of people, kind of a cooperative system, like for us, if I bought an entire trailer load of feed, one, it would be tie up a lot of cash, and two, by the time I got down to it, it would be the feed would be stale. I mean, it'd sit out in the shop for 3 months and go. In summer, that's not good. So, and it would completely null the reason why we did that in the first place. I'd have crappy feed in my shop. So, anyways, that's how we've done it. Using corn, soy, in that I don't have any problem using GMO-free corn and soybean. I really don't. The birds do real well. You can get non-soy rations. They run about twice as expensive. Another great resource is for Terrell, Jeff Maddox at for Terrell. For folks that want to mix their own, he can advise you. He's got dealerships around the country as well. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that. One thing, or a couple things on that. One, poultry nutrition is not just feeding scratch or feeding scraps. Like it really is to make money on especially when you start moving away from the heritage breeds like the Cornish Cross, Freedom Rangers, the hybrids like that, or then the sex links, the real productive birds. It's almost a humanitarian issue, or a humane issue, excuse me, if you don't give them what they need to produce, and it's not fair to the birds. You need to, they're highly productive. It'd be like having a professional athlete trying to do it on ramen noodles. So you really have to have good nutrition. We have a Pastured Poultry nutrition publication. It's about a decade old, but it's still really great. I'll cover a lot of nutrition in the Forages pub that's coming out here soon for ATRA. But you can get that Pastured Poultry nutrition publication online at the ATRA website. You can go and download it for free. And that's a great read. There's things like methionine. If you don't know what that is, then you need to learn if you want to be in the poultry business. And that. So ordering in bulk is great. Just make sure that you go through it, especially in the summer after 6, 7, 8 weeks, that feed the oils, the essential oils, the vitamins in that feed from when the grain's milled, they start going bad, or rancid in that. So you have to balance bulk with freshness and turnover. And once again, the quality is really important. On growing your own, so if I do, let's say those 200 broilers, I think off earlier. I don't have time to do the math in my head, but we'll go off that one chart where it had the broiler consumption rate. I think it was about 1.5 tons for 200 broilers. That's really rough ballpark. Okay, so if we do that, if I do 10,000 broilers, how many tons of feed am I going to have? If I've got to have that much feed, how much grain do I have to grow? So I get this question a lot, but when we really sit down and look at it, man, you're talking about a whole nother enterprise which requires a combine and kind of makes the whole easy get in, easy out, easy startup not really apply. So it's best to support grain farmers and their expensive combines in that, just by purchasing your feed. You can grow feed, and we call that pasture. in that. So, but you can also do some supplemental stuff too. Scraps like from the garden are great. If you have a CSA or vegetable operation, those are great. And that, but it's always good to supplement. The chickens like the variation in diet because they're omnivores just like us. How's that? Did we get most of them?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Just a little bit of a follow-up on that. The basically, I guess the question is the is the non-GMO feeds giving you a better, is it a better quality feed because it's non-GMO, or are you doing a political reasons? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, the issue is there was they wanted to know why you moved to that, and they were thinking therefore it was therefore more expensive, but
okay,
again, quality expense.
yeah.
But so are you getting a better conversion rate because you're using a non-GMO feed?
I'm getting a better conversion rate because of the quality of the non-GMO feed. And then the one I support, I don't like life that's patented. That's a personal viewpoint. Spence and Across Creek Farm, that's our
Okay.
viewpoint.
Yes, yes.
Like that's a personal. I mean, someone asked, why do I do it? That's not NCAT's standpoint. That's our viewpoint. And a lot of my customers that support me, that's their viewpoint. Out of all disclosure, I married into a 2,000-acre grain farm, rice and soybeans. So, in that, um, but so for personal reasons with biotechnology, which are once again personal, but then also, for marketability, it puts me in that mid tier. But like I said during the presentation, I can get horrible organic feed, which is much, much
Right,
worse than anything I can buy in a bag down at the feed store, which is conventional. Just because it's
right,
organic, just because it's GMO free, doesn't doesn't affect the performance. The birds don't read the labels. What they care about is the quality, and if it's milled well, then that if that's what's important. So Highland Feeds, if they stopped doing GMO and did conventional, because I'm confident of the quality, and that I would do conventional because that's where my feed source comes from. But I like the fact they do the GMO free. It does raise the cost though because most of the grain produced in this country, is genetically modified.
right. And just quickly, then, there's somebody has talked about insects and worms in particular. Other protein supplementation. Have you ever experimented with that? And does that
Yeah,
in any way offset costs or?
yeah. Well, their chickens actually need Uh, well, okay, real quick. They need protein, obviously, but not all proteins are composed of the same things. Proteins have building blocks called amino acids. And one of those amino acids is called methionine, and it is very, very difficult for birds to get that entirely off of forages or grain. So that's why chickens have to have animal supplementation. And insects are very high in methionine, and that typically in our ration, what we use, they actually mill in fish meal into the ration, and that's how you get that methionine needs. Birds that don't have methionine, it's not pretty. They don't when they don't have enough. They actually will cannibalize each other to try to get that meat. So the birds have to have it, especially layers, turkeys, and the broilers for making the meat. In that, so yeah, we supplement just through the fish meal in the ration. Um, in days past, I mean, if you shot a deer back in the day, or you had a cow that you cleaned out, you would actually, you know, hold that out there, especially in the winter, and the birds would pick the bones clean. Chickens are omnivores. If you've ever had a hawk kill, if you have familiarity, if you don't catch it quick, you'll find that the chickens just about strip their flock mate, which is kind of horrifying. But they strip their flock mate's bones. I mean, they eat all the stuff the hawk wants to eat because it's super nutrient dense. And so you may say, well, hey, I can go to the store and buy vegetarian fed organic eggs, and see you don't need those supplementation. Well, that's because they actually supplement with the synthetic protein powder that they make in a lab or in a factory. It's synthetic methionine, and you can actually use that in organic production in that. So that's the only reason you're able to get that vegetarian fed hen. So that's why just feeding them chicken scratch doesn't work. Each grain has a different quantity. Jeff Maddox at Terrell will actually formulate a good diet for you, like how many pounds of what you need. There's a real good group called the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association. They have a lot of information. They've got a nice newsletter or magazine that comes out, a real active listserv that I'm heavily involved with. So if you're looking at going in and finding more information, the APA, the Pastured Poultry Association, Jeff at Terrell, he has services that you can use to use what you have on the farm if you do want to mix your own. But yeah, so the insects, they really do though. It's nice. It's the ice cream of the pasture, so to speak. And this year, we had a horrible drought, and on the news, you had every hay farmer in Washington County, showing how bad the locust swarms were. The grasshoppers were going nuts, but at Across the Creek Farm, grasshoppers were few and far in between. So, anyways, yeah. So the insects are great. We don't raise any like vermiculture or anything like that because I would spend more money doing that than any savings. And you got to be careful that you don't just give insects to, because they will gorge themselves. So everything in balance.
Good. One more issue on, there was a little bit on watering. You kept going back to automatic watering, and somebody wanted to know what does that mean exactly, and how do you do it on your place? Because a hose, or
Yeah,
obviously there's timers, and
yeah,
anyway, how do you do that? There were some people asking.
yeah. Let me. As we talk, I'll kind of scale back to the broiler pens, and maybe that'll help. If we can. Uh, so let's see. Going back. Okay, so here, let's see if we can piece this together, folks. All right, so this is the back of a pen, and you see the PVC. There's a half-inch PVC pipe here that runs, and then there's some quarter-inch barb nipples right there, and then there's also a T with a barb nipple, and you can see the black line that runs in. That's the feeder hose to the bell water. And so essentially each pen has this, and then we have it's a quarter-inch PVC hose, flexible hose, like air hose or something like that. And in that we got that daisy chained to another pen, daisy chained to another pen. So this would reach out, there'd be a hose to the next pen, then over here there'd be a hose to the next pen, and so on. And you use twice the length. That way, when you move the pin next to it forward, you don't only have 10 foot of hose because you got to go 20 foot. You got to go the length of this pin right here plus the next pin that moves all the way up here. So you double the length of your hose that you daisy chain, and that drags on the ground. Then we have Plasson quick connects. There's a main feeder line, which every 100 foot we have a quick connect. Plasson, Plasson. It's a quick connect, and essentially it's a valve that you can just pop another hose into. And so we have a hose that runs from that valve that ties on to the pins. And on the first pin of each group of pins, we have a poultry water regulator for the bell waters. This is a bell water here. It has a little valve in there that as water fills up a bowl, you kind of adjust it so it shuts off the valve. Once it gets heavy enough, it goes down, and the weight of the water in the bowl shuts off the valve here. And you can see the hose going back to our PVC line. And this is actually the first pin in a series, so you can see the main line here. And if this chicken weren't in the way, you can see the water, or the pressure regulator there. These pins need, or these waters need anywhere from like 1 to 4 psi, so they don't need a lot of pressure at all, and even 10 psi will blow them out. And that's why we have this regulator here. This regulator is about 70, 80 bucks. It's high, but by daisy chaining, we can run 10, 15 pins together and it not be a problem. So it's pretty technical, the watering thing. When we come out, we'll have a technical pub come out hopefully this summer that'll have all this, and it'll have a lot of pictures and all diagrams and that. Um, but you can always contact me through Atra if you want as you're building when you start building it, and I can walk you through it.
Thank you. I think that's about all the time we have, and I know there were more, and some more specific ones, and we'll get back to. And I just want to remind you that there will be I know it's been long, and I want to thank Spence for hanging in there, and all of you guys hanging in there. We had quite a few people hanging around for a pretty long webinar. And anyway, this will be available again, so it'll be available hopefully this afternoon on our website, so you can listen again through everything. Remember the workshops, again, the workshops here in Montana. There's going to be workshops in the South too that Spence will be involved with. So there's opportunities in different parts of the country to do this, and so we'll look forward to hearing you again on that. And remember, there's a survey coming up. I know it's a little bit longer. It doesn't take long. It's a very short survey, and it's really important for us to make these better to do that. Any last words there, Spence?
No, just you got to get started to do it. And then also, if you're a veteran, we've got feel free to contact me. We've got a week-long sustainable ag training program that NCAT's doing for veterans and their spouses in Arkansas. It'll be paid for. We'll put you up and all that. It's kind of like a vocational training where you'll get exposure to lots of different types of agriculture. You'll work on our farm that you saw here today. We'll explore our books. You'll learn how to build business plans and that. So that's something, if you're a vet or you know veterans, just keep in mind. That'll be June 17th through the 22nd. Contact NCAT for more information. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully folks start growing chickens out on pasture, Jeff.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.